Alex Loman with When Hinges Creak here, and today we're going to be talking about our molds and how to use them a little bit. Kind of take some of the mystery out of how all of this works. So, what we're offering now is silicone molds of several of our different products, so you can mold and, or rather cast our pieces at home at your leisure. However many or however few you need. One of the problems that we've run into over the years is our customers don't always know, especially with things like our hardware and our gears and stuff like that, how many pieces they're going to need to finish out a set. So this kind of puts them in control of how many pieces they're able to make and when they're able to make them. A few words on molds. These are a very robust platinum silicone. It is a two-part silicone. We degas all of our rubber, which means we put it in a vacuum chamber. We vacuum it down to the perfect vacuum of space and remove all the moisture and all the gas that is inherently going to be in liquid silicone rubber. What that means in the real world is you get a much more robust mold. It's got a higher tear strength. It's a little bit denser. But most importantly, for those of you who are a little more experienced, you can actually pressure cast with these molds, which means you can pour resin in them, put them in a pressure caster, raise the pressure to between 30 and 60 psi, and get even sharper, more precise pieces, especially if you're wanting to cast with like clear resins and things like that. Now, that being said, like everything, all molds have a life expectancy. We generally assume that a mold with a decent amount of care is good for at least 70 pulls. While we feel that this is a pretty good rule of thumb, for the most part, we normally get more than 100, and we've even gotten as many as 140 out of a few of our molds over the years. The trick to a mold is to take very good care of it. You're going to want to use quality resins. While you can use fiberglass resins or two-part foams in your mold, it is going to burn them out faster. So we do recommend getting like a good polyurethane resin, which we do have available, and we'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But even with that, all molds have a life. The polyurethane resins are a thermoplastic, which basically means you pour your pieces together, and as the process starts to kick, it gets warm. And that warmth is what can tear your molds up. So what we recommend, when possible, after you pour your resin, which has a 3 to 5 minute setup time, go ahead and let it cool completely off before you remove your pieces, and you're going to find you're going to get a lot more pulls out of your mold that way. Now, let's say it's 2 weeks until inspection, and you've got a set that you've got to get done. Depending on your manpower situation, it may be worth your effort to just go ahead and do pulls every 10 or 12 minutes and get your set done, and just replace the mold later on. While they do seem expensive, the amount of product you get out of them really makes the price pretty negligible. Like this mold in particular is $150. It does 3/4 bolt heads, and it does 18 of them at a time. But when you multiply that times 70, and then you multiply that times the retail price, that ends up being about $1,300 worth of bolt heads if you were just to buy them a handful at a time. So this really is a pretty good value. So I'm going to show you how these work. I'm going to put on my handy dandy lab coat, which fortunately matches the rest of my general style. Gloves on. We always use nitrile gloves here in the shop because latex doesn't play real well with liquid silicone, which you won't be dealing with, of course. But we've discovered that they're a little more robust than the latex gloves. They're a little more expensive, but we find that we get a little more life out of them. And there is really no allergy concerns with these, like with latex gloves. 4% of the allergy or population has a latex allergy. So, get my safety glasses on. Good, nice, cheap insurance. So, about the molds. This particular mold is our double gear mold. It's a 2-inch gear, but there's 2 in each one of these. So, what we're going to do is, I'm going to lay down some paper to keep my work surface clean. You want your work surface to be relatively level. But what I'm going to do, in an effort to make sure my mix is accurate, this mold takes slightly under 2 ounces. But to keep my mixing ratios a little more accurate, I'm going to go ahead and mix 2 solid ounces. And then if I have any left over, I'm going to set this little mold down next to it, and it's got the 3/4 bolt heads inside. So instead of throwing the leftovers in the trash, I can just dump it into one of these bolt heads here and end up with kind of a free bolt head out of the deal. This is Art Cast. This is a 2-part polyurethane resin, and it mixes 1-to-1 by weight or volume. And we have pre-tinted our bee black. We can get you some tint if that's something you're interested in. Normally this dries kind of a nice bone color, about like this. What we do is we put a little bit of black in the bee, so we end up with a nice medium gray color. And also a few words on mixing cups. At the big box home improvement stores, they sell mixing cups. They're fine to use. Do not trust the markings on the side. They're not calibrated very well, and they may as well say for entertainment purposes only. They can be off as much as 10%, and what you don't want to do is end up with a mix or a ratio that's so far out of line that it's not going to set up properly. So I'm going to mix this up, some of this. I'm going to start with my A. And pour it nice and gentle. Now, once we add our B, our clock is ticking. The process has begun, the chemical reaction is occurring. That being said, don't panic, stay calm. Make sure your mix is nice and thorough. You don't want to leave unmixed material inside your cup, because then what you're going to end up with is a sticky piece or a piece that might not set up properly. But do maintain a sense of urgency as you go. All right, so I'm going to grab me a handy dandy popsicle stick. We're going to mix this nicely. And if you're careful, you can normally reuse these cups a couple of times. After the resin is cured completely, you can normally chip it out of there. I'm also going to show you in a moment how to mix by weight. And in that case, you can use disposable cups and not have to worry about it. I'm taking time to scrape the bottoms and scrape the sides, really get down in the corners and make sure everything's mixed thoroughly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour in a nice thin stream, taking my time at the lowest point and just kind of let it rise up on its own. And stop as we get to the top. Because we've got about 3 to 5 minutes on this, so while we need to maintain a sense of urgency, we don't have to rush. Alrighty, now I'm going to take my leftovers. I'm going to fill a few of these bolt heads. Now, a question that is probably going to come up. Let's say, what happens if I were to over pour these a little bit like I just did? Let me over pour a third one. You can do what's called screeding, where you take your stick, you turn it sideways, and you simply scrape it across the top of the mold and level it back out. Even if it runs down into the next one, not a big deal. We can either top those off or just let it cure and throw that little bit away. But the idea is to try to eliminate as much waste as is humanly possible and try to get the most pieces that we possibly can. And it's starting to warm up and get a little bit thick, and it actually can lock up on you as you're pouring if you wait too long. And we're back. We gave ourselves about 15 minutes. When putted around the shop, did a few other things, and we are now ready to demold our pieces. So I'm going to start with our gears. Just pop right on out of there, and you can see they pick up an incredible amount of detail. Even the original machining marks from when the original piece was actually fabricated, however long ago or wherever that happened. And we're going to pluck our bolt heads out. And these can be glued with hot glue, Gorilla Glue. You can drill holes through them and screw them down if you need to. And it's also important to note that we're not using any kind of a release agent. resins don't have any real inherent ability to stick to silicone. Kind of the only thing that sticks to silicone really well is actually other silicone. So you don't have to worry about spraying a release in there or anything like that. Now, this is what we call flash. And for the most part, you can kind of pick that off, but you can also get like a knife and trim back your edges a little bit if you deem that necessary, if you wanted to get them a little cleaner. Especially if you overpour, you're going to have a little bit on the back. The other thing that I wanted to show y'all is a way to do this with disposable cups. Now, for this, you will need a scale. And these are not real expensive. You can get these on Amazon or even Walmart, places like that. So I'm going to do all of this. I'm going to set my measurements to ounces and come close and look at the scale. You can tell that even just the slightest touch will make it register. So it's pretty sensitive. Now, there's a word on there, T-A-R-E. That word is tare. Right now, the scale is showing 0 because there's 0 ounces on it. But if I set my cup on there, now I have 0.4 ounces registering on there. So what we need to do is we need to reset this back to 0. So we are going to hit our tare button and tear the scale back out. So now we're at 0. So now we have eliminated the weight of our cup as a factor. So now I'm going to take my part A. And just forgive me, I'm pouring with my left hand here. And we're going to mix until we get to 1 ounce. There we go. 1 ounce of A. And then we'll add our B until we get up to 2 ounces. Just a touch more. There we go, 2 ounces. And as a side note, keep your caps on your bottles. The polyurethane resins typically don't like moisture, so the more outside air and moisture you can get in there. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay, and let's pour up something different this go around. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Molding and casting is an art all to itself. It is definitely more of an art than a science. There is a lot of science behind it and math and things like that, but at the core of it, we are artists. I'm getting pretty low, so I'm going to switch back over to my little 3/4 bolt head mold here and try to utilize the last of my resin and not waste any. In an ideal world, I would probably let these cool completely off before I plucked them, just to get the most possible life out of my molds. One more, come on, a little bit. Okay, right there. And now we can just throw this cup away. We don't have to worry about saving it or trying to clean anything out. So I hope this has been beneficial for everybody. You can always hit us up with questions. We can also direct you to other YouTube series that have a lot of molding and casting information on there. But we hope this is enough to get the ball rolling and get you started. You can find us online at www.windhingescreek.com or shoot us an email at windhingescreek@gmail.com. We'll see you soon.